Hello, Petal. How are you doing? How are things going? How is everything? I'm absolutely thrilled because everybody is present and accounted for now. So I feel really good about that because I know it's daft and I don't want to say it a lot, but it's true. You guys all matter. We're part of a little teeny tiny community and each and every one of you is seen and valued and appreciated. So I've been able to kind of like make contact and continue contact, and yeah, I'm thrilled about that. I'm happy. So enough about me and how happy I am. How are you doing? How are things going? Leave me some comments or feel free to email me at inkybink@gmail.com, which is inkibink@gmail.com. If you need to just vent, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, but I have got ears and I can be a friend, so there you go. Right then, my lovely beans. As ever, if you could hit the notifications bell, share, subscribe, follow if you don't follow already. Please have a little check that you are following, because some of them are, for some reason, there's some little glitches in the matrix, as it were, and some follows are actually being cancelled out. I don't know why, but if you could just double check for me, that'd be amazing, and it'll keep us on the air and keep the hamsters happy. The hamsters have returned from their winter holiday, all nice and tanned, and they're very happy and mellow and relaxed, and they brought some friends back with them. So yes, the world in my head is getting quite exciting. Right, I'm going to stop waffling because I'm nearly 2 minutes in and we're going to do chapter 18 of Here Comes the Sun. The last chapter, yes, it was really confusing, but it will come together in this one, so bear with me. Chapter 18 of Here Comes the Sun by our beloved Mr. Tom Holt. Meanwhile, in the interests of clarity and a comprehensible narrative, take the next exit on the left, over the flyover, and back down the past-bound lane almost as far as you can go, to a time when there was virtually no time at all, when the world was young and fresh and still thinking. Stuff it, it's years yet before I have to start thinking about pension schemes. A vibrant new administration has just moved into spanking new purpose-built offices with a state-of-the-art information technology, a highly trained and motivated young staff, and an instruction manual, which reads like this. Congratulations! You are now the owner of a new Terra 57636. If properly looked after, it will give you many years of reliable and pleasurable service. Narrator's note, FNAF. Although the Terra 57636 has been handcrafted using the only finest quality materials in order to get the very best in performance and reliability from your machine, you should observe the following basic rules. Number 1. Ensure that all surfaces are clean and free from excess oil. Do not remove the trees, as this interferes with the supply of oxygen to the intake manifolds. Number 2. Try to avoid discharging toxic waste into the oceans. This can upset the ecological balance and lead to excessive wear on the ice caps. Number 3. Nuclear weapons should not be used in the Terra 57636. It has not been proved to withstand the pressures likely to be generated by these particular nuclear explosions. The manufacturers cannot and will not be held responsible in the event of accident or damage resulting from non-observance of this warning, which will also invalidate the guarantee. And so on. Most of the manual is in fact taken up with awful warnings as to what will happen to anybody who infringes the manufacturer's patent or makes unauthorised copies of the software, and a garbled version of this has survived to this day in the form of the Revelation of St. John the Divine. The rest of the text was lost many centuries ago. A minor but ambitious young official has just been appointed deputy head of the Sun Department. A relatively unimportant post, but even high flyers have to start somewhere. It's his job to ensure that the sun is flown on exactly the right trajectory, to ensure that it delivers just the right amount of light and heat to the world busily evolving below. Too little, and life will be stillborn. Too much, and there's a risk that it will turn out the wrong way. Strange, warped mutants with malfunctioning components and entirely unsuitable evolutionary matrices will emerge from the bubbling green soup that covers the surface instead of the superbly constructed designer life forms that the manufacturers intended. Look ye very closely, and in the corner of the hangar you will see a scruffy individual in the first ever pair of worn-out jeans and the primal Def Leppard sweatshirt, loafing aimlessly around with a broom in one hand and a pair of headphones over his ears. Now, it will be many millennia before the Sony Walkman is invented, but he's getting in some early practice. His chances of promotion are slim. And on the 6th day, the minor but ambitious young official woke up, put on his shiny black leather flying jacket and his goggles, and strolled confidently down towards the hangar. So far, he told himself, he'd done a pretty good job. The boss himself had said so, and he ought to know. Pretty good job you're doing there, young'un, he'd said, and you couldn't put it more clearly than that if you tried. He climbed into the cockpit, checked the rear-view mirror and the oil gauge, and fastened the safety harness. Pretty good job, young'un. Well, absolutely. Credit where credit's due and all that. Flaps, he shouted. You what? The official sighed. I said, he yelled back. Flaps. Narrator's note. FNAF, double 2 times 2. What about them? Are they engaged or aren't they? Come on, man, I haven't got all day. Flaps engaged. Switches. Yeah. The young official made a despairing gesture. Oh, for crying out loud, are the switches on or off? He cried. Or do I have to come and check them for myself? Switches on. Who bloody Ray? Right then. Contact. Pause. I said, growled the young official. Contact. But of course, nobody's listening. I'm talking to myself, which is just as well, because it's the only way I'm going to get an intelligent conversation round here. Contact! Yeah, right, sorry. There was a thud, then a roar, then the hangar started to shake as the huge machine's 4 enormous compression chambers slowly filled with cold blue fire. The young official pulled his goggles down over his eyes, put the joke halfway in and called out, "Tucks away!" And then he was flying. For a few seconds the world seemed far too small to contain such a wild extravagance of movement. Then the air brakes caught, and the giant projectile burst through the thin haze of water vapour that hung over the sparkling new oceans, levelled out and started to fly straight and level. A pretty good take-off, young'un, said the minor but ambitious official to himself. Neat work. Nothing to it, really. All you have to do is hang on to this handle thing and it'll fly itself. He leaned forward in his seat and peered over the side. Far away, he could glimpse through the loopholes in the clouds a shining blue horizon, textured by the breeze into a million regular waves. Now in there somewhere, at this very moment, the atoms were rubbing together in a miraculously improbable way. Life was just around the corner. Smiling, the minor but ambitious young official relaxed back into his seat, looked up at the endless blue ceiling above him and began to dream. All right. Right now he was doing a job that was little better than the executive grade 2 status, but that wasn't going to last forever. It wasn't as if they could just take a trainee, however talented, and plonk him straight down in a 5th-floor office. There were motions to be gone through, knees to be browned. Just as soon as you proved to them that you could do all this noddy stuff with one hand tied behind your back, they'd have you out of it and sitting behind a desk in no time flat. That would mean clerical status, and once you'd got that, you were halfway there. Anyone with an ounce of go in him could whiz up the clerical ladder like a rat up a drain with the bailiffs on his tail, and then you would be in admin. No more dealing with actual things. No more flying suns or grading snowflakes or lugging about tectonic plates. Oh, no. In admin, they only dealt with the really important, totally nebulous things. 5-year plans, forecasts, projections, economic models, cost-effectiveness ratios, overall strategies. There would be committees, subcommittees, quasi-autonomous review panels, watchdog commissions, one-man working parties. You could have absolute control and maybe even a chair that swivels. And then would come the real quantum leap. First, to departmental status, before soaring up upwards to the empyrean heights of supervisory management, to permanent chairmanship of a committee so vast and so indefinable that the whole curved universe itself would be the only part of its jurisdiction. As yet, nothing so mind-bendingly huge existed anywhere in the cosmos, apart from in the mirror, but ambitious official's imagination. But if it ever came to pass, it would have to have a name that was abstract to the point of stretching the parameters of applied metaphysics. Finance and something. Finance and something. Finance and ultimate purposes. Or something like that. The minor but ambitious official smiled. He and the world were young, talented, and going places together. He and the world were like that. Oh shit. Actually, that was way ahead in the future, but as we've already seen, the minor but ambitious official is way ahead of his time. A long way below, but still rather closer than it ought to be, the surface of the sea boiled. Huge banks of water vapour drifted up into the sky, jumped and bumped jarringly into temperature shifts, liquefied and fell back. Out of the water, jagged points of rock poked nervous and embarrassed fingertips like guests who have turned up far too early for the birthday party of someone they scarcely know. And deep down, in the very dregs of the ocean, something that had no business moving moved. It wasn't quite the way it's depicted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Oh no, there's no interdigital fireworks, no snap and crackle of white fire. There should have been, of course, and speeches, and a taped cut with a special presentation pair of silver shears and a band. But there wasn't. This is the way the world begins, not with the zap, but with an almighty cock-up. With a frenzied jerk on the joystick, narrator's note, fnar. The minor but ambitious official hauled the sun back up to its proper place in the sky and sagged forward against the straps of the safety harness. In his mind's eye, he saw two visions. The first, of the world as it should have been, the calm, dignified procession of perfectly formed organic pioneers rising serenely from the depths of the ocean to colonise the purpose-built land masses, to evolve in a purposeful way into demigods, to begin the long but completely orthodox march towards reunion with their creator, to the moment when they turn their smug faces to the sun and see only their own reflection. The second, of the world as it was going to be, nasty green slimy things slopping up onto premature beaches, twitching apologies for mandibles in the germ-ridden air, slowly squeezing themselves into all manner of outlandish shapes, ammonites, dinosaurs, mammoths, monkeys, things even more obscenely ludicrous than monkeys, things that would slip out of control and start smashing the place up, building motorways, exterminating whales, waging wars, wearing fluorescent green beachwear. Very carefully, the minor but ambitious official looked all around him, and down at the seas below. Maybe nobody would notice. Not yet, anyway, and by the time they did, who could possibly tell whose fault it had been? He fixed his eyes on the western horizon, steadied his grip on the joystick, and began to whistle aggressively. Sometime later, he made a faultless landing back at the hangar, cut the motors, and climbed rather unsteadily out the cockpit. As he walked the long way across the hangar to the big double doors, nobody came running up. Nobody called his name. There was no thick-set men in raincoats, no soldiers, no nothing. Just the Urk with the broom and his headphones, prodding half-heartedly at the first few molecules of dust as they drifted through the still, pure air. He closed his mind to the problem, and gradually the problem began to disintegrate. Fragment of the imagination. Trigger the light. Nothing moved at all. Pretty good job, young un. Thanks, sir. Glad you liked it. Bit low though, weren't you? The minor but ambitious official spun on his heel and stared. For his part, the Irk with the broom made a more than usually half-hearted stab at an atom of grime and scratched his ear where the headphones chafed the lobe. "Sorry? I said a bit low there this morning. Could have been an accident, going as low as that. You know, could have set something off before it's time." The Irk raised his head and grinned. "You want to be more careful," he added. "I don't know what you mean," replied the official, apparently through a mouthful of cotton wool. "I kept it exactly the right height all the way." "It's all right then," replied the Irk, widening his grin. "Must have been imagining things." "Well, don't do it again," the official snapped. "Get on with your work. This place is an absolute tip." But the grin only became wider, and the official turned away and nearly ran for the doors. As he retreated, he may or may not have heard somebody muttering something like, "Calls himself a high flyer, big joke, low flyer been either of the mark." He grabbed the door, hauled it open, and slammed it. And it came to pass exactly as the minor but ambitious young official had foreseen. He got his promotion. The world got mankind, and nobody said anything. True, there were a few heads shaken at hyper-departmental level, and there was a full internal inquiry, and then nothing. Nothing except a fierce burn deep in the official's mental retina, a grin, the memory of a tiny movement in the depths of the sea. Meanwhile, two careers developed, one dizzily ascending and one sort of slithering along the bottom. "Maybe," said the official to himself, 100 times a day. He's forgotten all about it. A brain like that needs all its capacity just to make sure the beer ends up in the mouth and not in front of the shirt. If he's going to say something, he'd said it by now. And then the grin would float by like a stray patch of antimatter and whisper, "Don't kid yourself, he hasn't forgotten." As an interesting footnote to all this, it is worth recording that the evolutionary development of the human waste disposal system was the result of the young official's subconscious desire to have something appropriate to mutter under his breath every time he thought it. "Oh," Bjorn said. "Exactly," Ganga interrupted. "That's why, as soon as he was appointed chairman of the Finance and General Purposes Committee, the first thing he did was have you spirited away to an ideal and kitted out with a brand new identity. It was a good try, but doomed to failure from the start." "Oh," Bjorn repeated. He was thinking, stuff me, what a lot of long words this jerk knows. "Come to think of it, I remember something like what you just said, but I never thought." From the floor there was a howl that set all the atoms in the cosmos on edge. Ganga stared. "You mean you hadn't? I mean, it didn't occur to you?" "Nah," Bjorn replied. "Course now you told me, it all sort of makes sense. Yeah, you've got a point there." He leaned down and put his lips close to Finance and General Purpose's ear. "Bastard!" he shouted. "Well," said Ganga quickly. "Anyway, that's beside the point. Now we all know, and that's what really matters, isn't it? In case you're wondering how I found out." "You read his mind, didn't you?" said Staff quietly. "So?" Staff was white as a sheet and trembling. "That's not fair," he said. "You shouldn't do things like that." Ganga looked as if he'd just been kicked in the nuts by an angel. "Oh, come off it," he said. "You've just heard me say that this jerk is responsible for everything. He's a goddamn evolution criminal. That's what he is. You do understand that, don't you?" "Of course I do," Staff shouted. "That still doesn't make it right. You can't just go about peering in through people's ears like that." He turned away. Ganga shook his head in disbelief and turned to Jane. "You don't think it was wrong, do you?" he said. Jane thought about it for a moment. On the one hand, she didn't hold with bugging. On the other hand, she thought for a moment about Homo sapiens and how many things crossed her mind. Toothache, the division of the species into two genders, acne, comfort eating, split ends, clogged pores, catarrh, armpits. You could forgive most things given time, but you got to draw the line somewhere, and feet. If this guy was responsible for feet, narrator's note, this is just in reference to the beginning of things as opposed to the evolution of things today, so especially when it comes down to gender, because that's a social construct, as we all know. Right then. He had it coming, she said. Then she, too, leaned forward. Why 5 toes, you scumbag? Go on, answer me. Why 5, for God's sake? 4 not good enough for you or something? Ganga nodded. Motion carried, I think, he said. Now then, all we've got to do is... The room suddenly filled with a white light. From the street below, a tannoy invited them to reflect on the fact that the building was actually surrounded. If they had weapons, it might be a shrewd move at this stage to throw them out the window. Jane cleared her throat. Excuse me, she said, but who's that exactly? Ganga looked around at her. Out there, you mean? The ones with the searchlights and the PA system? That's right.
I have an idea. It's my colleagues from security.
Staff interrupted.
This is just a wild guess, but I think they want to arrest us.
I see, said Jane. Why?
It's what they're best at, I suppose, Ganga said. I mean, why do painters paint? Why do potters make pots? The question we should be asking and addressing is, will they succeed? For his part, Bjorn gave them the kind of stare that large, stupid people reserve for their intellectual betters when they're indulging in verbal fireworks instead of just getting on with the bloody job. That's great, it said. And you won't mind if I leave you to it and just look round for a gun or something? He started to search the drawers of the desk, and soon he'd found out what he'd been looking for. The bad guys always have small, pearl-handled guns in their desk drawers. Right, he said. He crossed to the window and hurled a chair through it. Then he flattened his back against the wall, extended his arm through the shattered glass and pulled the trigger. Down below, a spectral warrior felt something land on top of his head. Gingerly, he reached up and felt the crown of his cowl. It was damp. Meanwhile, Bjorn was staring at the prisoner with contemptuous disbelief. "A water pistol?" he croaked. "What sort of chicken-shaped wimp keeps a pearl-handled water pistol in the top drawer of his desk?" "A pacifist," Ganga suggested. Staff sighed and pointed at 3 tall potted ferns on top of the filing cabinet, just before they disintegrated in a hail of automatic fire from the street below. "Not so much a pistol," he mumbled, inevitable since he was now hiding under the desk with his head wedged sideways into the carpet, "as a novelty plant, mister. I seem to remember the lucky dip at the office party a few years back."
"They seem to be shooting at us," Jane remarked, enunciating the words with bell-like clarity. "Should they be doing that, I wonder?" Staff raised his hand painfully and glowered at Bjorn.
"I think we seem to have started it," he growled. "They're just defending themselves."
"Fine," Jane replied. "I can quite see their point. I mean, a water pistol at this range, you could get absolutely soaked. You could get pneumonia." There was a hollow thump down below them somewhere, followed about half a second later by an explosion in the office. The room was suddenly full of charred and shredded paper.
"Somebody would have appeared to have taken out the filing cabinet with a wire-guided missile,"
Staff announced. He sounded for all the world like a BBC Radio Royal Weddings compere commenting on Armageddon.
"I can only assume they have their reasons because—"
There was a faint whoosh, and something whirred past Staff's hiding place and vanished into the hole in the far wall where the filing cabinet had once been. It was Bjorn, jumping up, grabbing Jane in one hand and the hostage in the other, and running for it. Staff realised that he was on his own, and it crossed his mind that he shouldn't be. Something else crossed his mind. On tiptoe.
"It won't do any good, you know,"
he sighed wearily.
"I mean, if I go, you go too, so you're just fooling yourself."
"Maybe," replied a voice somewhere in his memory, "but it's all as broad as it's long. Besides, there's some amazingly good places to hide in here."
"Where?"
"Well," said the voice, "can you remember that time you went on that fact-finding visit to those caves right down in the heart of the mountains somewhere?"
"Vividly."
"Thanks. Yes, this'll do nicely. You can't remember a light, can you? It's as dark as a bag down here."
"No, I can't."
"Or a sandwich, maybe? Come on, you must be able to remember something to eat. I could be down here for a very long time."
Staff didn't bother to reply. Instead, he crawled out from under the desk, ducked as a lump of ceiling smashed down a few inches away from him, and then picked up his feet and ran. He made it to the hole in the wall just a fraction of a second before it closed up. "Me down!" Jane yelled, and then landed with a bump. "Ouch!" she commented. "Sorry," Bjorn replied. "I thought you said put me down, so I did." Jane sat up and rubbed her shin vigorously, sending small and entirely unintentional electric signals running the length and breadth of Bjorn's spinal column. "Where are we, anyway?" she growled. "I don't know," Bjorn said. "Wherever this is, though, I don't reckon we should stay here. Those guys out there want us just ordinary security, you know. More like spectral warriors." Jane nodded and then grabbed hold of the hostage by his nose. "You," she said. "What's happening?" The hostage, still tucked under Bjorn's arm like a quivering football, made a tiny, meaning noise of pure terror. Jane sighed. "Can you do anything to make him talk?" she asked Bjorn. He nodded. "Mind you," he added, "all he'll probably say is, 'Oh shit,' and 'ouch, you're breaking my arm,' and stuff like that." But there was a nervous cough from under Bjorn's armpit. "We're in the vaults of the central administrative section, directly under the closed file store," it twittered, "and if you hurt so much of a hair off my head, then so help me I'll rip your lungs out and make Chinese lanterns out of them." Bjorn stared down. "You what?" he demanded. "Don't blame me," whimpered the tiny voice. "That's not me talking. I'm absolutely terrified of you. It's him who's making the threats." "Him?" "Well, me. Other me. Him. Mercy." Bjorn frowned. "You mean there's two of you?" "Sort of. Well, no, there's just one of me, but in two halves. One mind, two bodies, each body containing an undivided half-section of the same integral whole." The voice hesitated. "I'm the meek, cowardly one, and I'm the complete bastard. It's all you could do with making schizophrenia work for you rather than being a handicap." "All right," said Jane. "That'll do. At least we know where we are now." She paused. "Where are we?" Bjorn furrowed his brow. "We're under the closed file store in the vaults of—" "Quite," Jane interrupted. "I meant, where are we in relation to the way out? The sort of answer I'm looking for," she added helpfully, "is either this way or follow me." Bjorn nodded. "Follow me," he said. It was turning out to be a bad day. The sun was refusing to start. A crew of 7 muscular mechanics had given it their best shot, and all they'd managed to do was flood the engine and bend the starting handle. The bright spark who'd suggested putting a set of jump leads on the battery of the moon was now in hiding, helped considerably by the fact that there was now no light of any description whatsoever. As a result of the freak shortout and mainframe weather, it was now slashing up with rain over 2 continents. The same fault was having drastic effects in Perjury, where the Thunderbolt cannons had jammed themselves on automatic override and were giving insurance salesmen, presidential spokesmen, and the organisers of award ceremonies a very hard time indeed. Fortunately, the manifold cam rocker on the Lightfinder unit had sheared its locking stud, which meant that each shot landed precisely 18 inches to the left. Gremlins in the signal box at chronology processing meant that the Western Hemisphere had just had 16 consecutive bank holidays in the space of 15 minutes. The random selector needle at Requisitions, a central prayer answering agency, had stuck solid on God Save the Queen, with the result that Her Majesty had had a truly unpleasant morning, being repeatedly snatched from the jaws of sudden and unexpected death by supernatural forces. A gang of maintenance men were crawling towards the stylus across the main resonator disc with big hammers and extremely mixed feelings, because if they got the bloody thing free and then it went and got stuck on "Give us this day our daily bread," they were definitely not going to be held responsible. All dreams delivered within the last 48 hours had been returned marked "not known at this address," and some of them were ticking. And finally, if that wasn't enough to be going on with, the music of the spheres was suddenly distinctly audible throughout the length and breadth of the cosmos, and had turned out to be That's Entertainment, played with one finger on a Yamaha organ. This is what happens when no one's in charge. "George!" Chief, are you questioning a direct order, trooper?" "Not as such, Chief, certainly not. No perish the thought. It's just, me and the lads, we was wondering—"
"What?"
"Like, sort of, charge where, Chief? Because, I mean, charge, yes, behind you every step of the way there. Absolutely 110% commitment on all sides. No sweat. Guaranteed. Only it's just that as orders go, sort of like 99.999% absolutely brilliant, but directionally speaking, I wouldn't say it was vague exactly, really not vague at all. Vague's quite the wrong word for this situation. More sort of general, in fact. More flexible, really. Yes, that's it, flexible. But maybe just this once, in the circumstances. Perhaps if we were to play down the flexibility angle, just somewhat in the interest of greater, precision, if you sort of catch my general drift, perhaps. Well, it was just a thought, maybe follow me. Thanks, Chief. Got that? Right on, right.
You're lost, aren't you? Bjorn stopped dead in his tracks and frowned. Having a vocabulary marginally smaller than that of the average phrase book compiler has its drawbacks. What Bjorn wanted to do was to explain that the sort of place where they were now, you were always, by definition, lost. The crucial thing was to be lost in the right way, because then, once all your directional preconceptions had been stripped away and you were floating free like a magnetic needle in a saucer of water, the chances were that because in a truly random environment, objects hit the line of least resistance, the barometric pressure of convenience would draw you on in the right direction. Much more swiftly and surely than if there was a bloody great big yellow line drawn on the floor with "This Way" painted in fluorescent letters every 5 yards. What he actually said was, "Yeah."
Thought so, Jane sighed.
She sat down on something. It was too dark to see exactly what. She slipped off her shoe and massaged the sole of her foot.
I had this horrible feeling,
Bjorn braced himself and took one final slash at the cliff face of language.
Well, meant to be lost, right? 'Cause this isn't a place where you can sort of find on purpose. It more sort of finds you.
To his great surprise, Jane nodded.
I see what you mean, she said. Like the public lavatories in Italy. Yes, I can relate to that.
There was a thoughtful silence, broken only by a faint, muffled, rather wet noise as a hostage surreptitiously tried to gnaw through the length of clothesline by which he was tethered to Bjorn's wrist. Since the hostage had small, uneven teeth, and the washing line was the same hawser-like article Bjorn had helped himself to before leaving the ideal, they were certainly content to leave him to it until there was a risk of him choking on his own displaced fillings.
Only, Jane mused, you still haven't said where it is we're supposed to be going. I take it you do actually know? Or is that cheating?
Bjorn made perhaps the greatest effort of his life. Well, not the very greatest. That had been when he'd passed by a pool of drying cement in the street and not their footprints in it.
Well, he said,
hand-turning his words with exquisite care,
I do sort of know where we're going. It's just I don't sort of know, It's more like the place knows, and I don't.
Jane tested this statement carefully and decided that it had the logical equivalent of a bent axle.
You mean we're lost, she said.
Yeah.
Jane stood up.
That's fine, she said. Follow me. She didn't know how she knew. She just knew. Narrator's note. I understand that feeling really well. When you kind of you've got your spatial awareness. If you've been somewhere once, you always know how to get your way back out again. I just wish it would apply to other labyrinth of... Yes. Anyway, I digress. So she walked directly into the wall.
Ouch,
she said a moment later. And in her mind, along with a tasteful display of coloured lights and a dull throbbing sound like the sea, a voice said,
Nice try, but you're a foot to the left. Try again.
She tried again and vanished. Bjorn stared. There was the wall, and Jane had just hooked through it. No dynamite, no careful feeling for the seams, not even a zip fastener or a yard or so of Velcro. That was cool. There was a soft clink. The hostage had broken a tooth. Wearily, as if noticing his presence for the first time and deciding he didn't really hold with it, Bjorn grabbed the hostage in one hand and his knapsack in the other, then he emptied out the sack and stuffed the hostage into it.
Now, the hostage was small, but not that small. There was no way he was going to fit in there, at least not without the sort of pruning and editing usually reserved for a young reporter's first major story. The head would have to go for a start. He fitted. The sack could have been made to measure for him.
How this came to be possible nobody knows, although it may have had something to do with the fact that the hostage sensed that if he didn't, he was going to end up reduced to his bare essentials, like a Jerusalem artichoke. Bjorn buckled down the flap, adjusted the weight on his shoulders, and took a long, shrewd look at the wall. Some people are cool by nature. The rest of us just have to try that little bit harder. He lowered his head and charged. Jane sat up. I think I got my nose. A party of nuns shifted their hand luggage from hand to hand and stared at her. A young couple sitting under the departure board giggled. Nobody moved to help her up or anything like that. A few seconds later, Bjorn stumbled heavily forwards, fell over her, and landed in the lap of a sleeping Japanese businessman who woke up and stared at him for a long half-second before ostentatiously taking out his handkerchief and wiping blood from his collar. The blood was coming from a nasty but superficial gash on Bjorn's scalp. Nothing serious. Bjorn's head, it should be apparent by now, had the density of a collapsed star. In a head-butting contest, he would have taken on the whole of Mount Rushmore and won. Bloody hell, he said. For a minute there I thought we were in an airport. There was a pause, just long enough for Jane to satisfy herself that her nose was indeed still at unity with itself. You were right, she said. I suppose it had to happen eventually. There was a voice, and it wasn't inside anybody's head, and what it said was,
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last call for BWA flight number 6672 blah blah blah. Passengers for BWA flight number 6672 blah blah. Proceed to gate number 0 square, boarding easy progress.
just like flight departure announcers the world over. It's worth putting on record the fact that they don't deliberately mislead or misinform. It really gets to them after a while, and a lot of them end up with serious psychological trauma. It's just that they have this awful superstitious hang-up about not saying the names of places or the numbers of departure gates, which makes them subconsciously slur these words, or at best say them through 3 layers of compacted paper tissue. Jeez, Bjorn gasped. We are in an airport. Eh? He froze. Then his hand flicked behind his back where he could feel a spreading, soul-chilling dampness making its way slowly down from between his shoulder blades to the base of his spine. In his experience, the only one thing that seeped quite so thoroughly, and that was blood. He brought his hand back, placed it under his nose, and sniffed the tips of his fingers. Actually, 2 things. True. One of them is indeed blood. This was the other one. Just out of interest, Jane remarked, why have you got a baby strapped to your back? That's not a baby, that's the hostage, Bjorn said. Once he'd said it, of course, it occurred to him that you don't say words like hostage in airports, even airports that probably only exist in the vague and unfrequented dimensions under the stairs of the human brain. But then, of course, it was way too late. I see, Jane said, and nodded. He's tended to a baby. She continued looking at Bjorn, just over his shoulders to be precise, but her next words were addressed vertically. Well, she said, that's fine. Don't mind me. After all, it's your continuum. You do whatever you like. She shuddered. Anyway, she went on, you agreed that we seem to be in an airport? Looks like it. Bjorn confirmed. He was trying to stuff a very, very disreputable handkerchief up the back of his shirt. Well, why not? Jane replied, smiling brightly. We're better than an airport if we want to go somewhere. I mean, we don't have any passports or tickets or anything like that, let alone any money, and she stopped herself and then started again. That's not going to be a problem, though, is it? She said. Now then, where was it we wanted to go? Said Bjorn. It's very logical, Jane went on, sorting through her pockets with a sort of manic confidence. We need to go and we wanted to go somewhere. Therefore, we are in an airport. I think we can put that down to good old-fashioned cause and effect, somehow. She paused and considered briefly. In the old days, she added, I think there was a lot of tedious mucking about with genies and lamps and 3 wishes, but I suppose they rationalised all that. Ah, here we are. She held out 2 passports and 2 tickets. Although she wasn't in the least surprised the way they'd materialised, she was intrigued to notice they were return tickets. One was marked there and the other back. Oh, come on, she exclaimed testily. Either the whole free will thing was a gag or it wasn't. You can't have it both ways. A nun looked at her. You keep out of it, she snapped.
JM, your blah 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 passengers on BWA flying number scourge to somewhere else. Please proceed immediately to gate number middle. Passengers JM beyond blah, thank you.
Jane winced, then looked directly upwards once more. Thank you, she said, and about time too.
This way. Actually, Chief, that way's a splash.
Stuff stopped running and collapsed against the door. It swung open and he fell through. Now, it is important to remember that all offices are one office. All corridors are one corridor. And all fire extinguishers, wherever consciously situated, end up directly on a level with the kneecaps of stumbling people. Staff swore. He was in his own office.
Now, hold on.
He panted to nobody in particular.
If we're going to play silly beggars with each other, we might as well do it properly.
A light switched on, apparently of its own accord. There was suddenly a cup of tea on the desk, and Staff knew without tasting it that there were indeed 2 sugars in it. He realised that he hadn't had the faintest idea who he was talking to, but whoever it was had listened, and it was terrifying.
Ganga,
he whispered.
Can you hear me?
There was silence, internal as well as external. He shook his head frantically, but nothing rattled about in it. He even tried blowing his nose, but no dice.
Can you hear me?
He said.
How about one...
He looked about frantically and saw the cup of tea.
1 digestive biscuit for yes and 2 for no.
2 digestive biscuits slid out of the air and into the saucer. They seemed to be grinning.
I see,
Staff muttered, his teeth set.
It's going to be one of those days, isn't it?
And outside in the world, a split pin in the gravity induction drive mysteriously floated out and fell on the floor with an unheeded tinkle. It caused a very localised problem. The world was unaffected except for a square mile of Amazonian rainforest where the trees were suddenly sucked down into the ground. Staff walked deliberately around his chair, sat down and put his feet up in one of the drawers. He reached out for the tea and biscuits. They moved, gently but firmly, 6 inches to the right.
I suppose telling me who you are would be out of the question,
he said. 2 digestive biscuits, travelling like the razor-sharp throwing discs of the Japanese ninja, scythed through the hair on the top of his head and embedded themselves in the wall. He glowered at them.
Fair enough,
he said firmly.
I can wait.
The universe, or at least a part of it filling Staff's office, the relevant part, held its breath. There was a puzzled silence. Staff folded his arms, leaned his head back, and gazed at the ceiling. Time, of course, is tricky stuff. And it would be fortuitous to say half an hour passed or an hour ticked by under the circumstances. Better to say some time passed and leave it at that. Staff sat still, saying nothing, surrounded by nebulous bafflement. After a while, the ceiling began to flicker and suddenly was covered with a profoundly weird version of Michelangelo's vision of creation. But Staff just closed his eyes. Some time passed. That was a bit of a long chapter. Well, I hope that's explained things a little bit, because it's kind of like this part is one of those wonderful things about Tom Holt. He will literally scramble your mind and your brain. You're like, what the flying frisbee is all this about? And then it'll kind of like balance out in the last couple of chapters of the book. So, talking about that, we have got 2 more chapters after this one. So we need to start thinking about our next book. And Bayekers, can I remember what we were talking about before? So, do we want to go for another Tom Holt? Do we want to do a different book? What do we fancy? And if we do Tom Holt, would you fancy something like My Hero or Grail Blazers? Or I think there was one about his pseudonym as well. We could try and get one of those. But those ones, I have to get them on ebook and buy those ones. So, you know. But anyway, I digress. I am so glad that you're all here. I'm so glad that your ears are all out there. I do appreciate you incredibly, very, very much. And, you know, the fact that we all band together and we're all here. It's just so heartwarming. It makes me feel really good. And now it's time for another nana nap. Nana nap. That's a thing. That is a thing in my life now. I've got to say it. And it was inspired by you guys. So thank you very much for that. And as ever, and I know I say this a lot, so you must be bored of it by now, but if you're too hot, hydrate. If you're too cold, wrap yourself up in a fleecy blanket like a human burrito and snuggle. And have a cup of tea or coffee, depending on your preferences. Maybe a cup of hot chocky. Who knows? Do you say cocoa or hot chocolate? We'll have to do a little poll of that. Cocoa or hot chocolate? Because it is -2 here today, and it's a bit chilly over in America, I understand. But the thing is, Canada's easing off, and it's all kind of like mellow. Who knows? Who knows? Right then, my lovely beans. Most of all, whether you're hot or cold, take care of yourself. And if you could see your way to leaving a like or hit the notifications bell, share, subscribe and follow, that would be awesome. But I know most of you actually do, so I really appreciate you for that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, I've got to say, I was screaming the other day because we were doing quotes from Kevin and Perry Go Large, and there's nothing like, you know, can I have a jam sandwich please, Miss Butson? You cannot do that voice for that joke, man. Right, lovely beans. You take it easy, stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.